And kind of with saying that the Bible, through Christ, is kind of the fullness of truth, what would you make of the claim that these, texts are written in like the Bronze Age, and we've just progressed beyond that, and we know much better now?
Yeah, that phrase you used, I think it's Christopher Hitchens used it, and everyone else imitated him. They're Bronze Age myths, this old pre-scientific nonsense. Well, one prejudice there, it's typical of modernity, is that all knowledge progresses the way the sciences do. So we do indeed see in the sciences a kind of steady upward progression from more primitive beginnings, and then there's a steady upward progression to today. So we'd say, well, the science of today is better even than Einstein. It's better than Newton. Today's science is the highest. Well, then we can be misled, though, by that into the prejudice that all knowledge proceeds in the same way. Would you say, for example, that the poets writing today, they're better than Robert Frost, or they're better than William Shakespeare? The poets writing today, they're better than Dante. I mean, you'd smile at that. It's ridiculous, because poetry doesn't advance that way. Would you say the philosophers writing today, you open up like Philosophy Today magazine, they are better than Aristotle? I mean, who would say? No one would say that. They're better than Thomas Aquinas. They're better necessarily than Immanuel Kant. Because philosophy doesn't move in that steady upward way, but it's more ups and downs and so on. Religion. Would you say the religious ideas of today, they're clearly better than what Isaiah was saying? They're clearly superior to what Jeremiah was coming. Come on. So what? They're from the Bronze Age. So is Homer. So we'd say the Iliad and the Odyssey, we shouldn't even read those texts, those silly ancient texts from the Bronze Age. Nothing to teach us. We don't read Aristotle's Ethics because it's from this ancient period? Come on. It's just born of a prejudice. These ancient texts can indeed teach us a great deal about the deepest truths of human life. You read the Psalms, we can all recognize ourselves in the Psalms. All the modalities and ups and downs of human life, they're all on display there. And if you can't see that, you're blind. And to claim that because the Psalms are written a long time ago, we shouldn't pay attention to them, that's just nonsense.
Father, with that fact, because it was written so long ago, but it is still relevant to us today, is there a particular lens through which we should view it? Do we need to come to the table with an understanding of the time period where it was written when there's inconsistencies with the ideas that we have today?
Yeah, and it's a complex question you're raising of hermeneutics, of interpretation. How do you interpret a text, especially an ancient text? Part of the task is indeed what you alluded to, knowing that time as well as you can. Who wrote it, to what audience, when, why, how? Those are very important questions to raise, so we understand the setting of a time. I want to know all I can about the Psalms, even though it's hard to guess really who wrote them. We don't know, but when were they written? Why? What was going on at the time? I want to know that about Isaiah when I read him. When I'm preaching on Isaiah, I want to know why he was saying this at this particular time. However, that's not the only lens, that kind of strict historical lens. We would say as Christians, the great lens through which to read the whole Bible is Jesus Christ. In the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Bible, there's a great image. They're up in the heavenly court, and they see the lamb standing as though slain coming in. That's, of course, Jesus crucified. And he opens the scroll. He opens the 7 seals on the scroll that reveals the meaning of history. And that's a very important point, that it's Jesus crucified and risen from the dead who is the interpretive key to the whole Bible. So what does Isaiah mean? I can ask the question historically. What did the historical Isaiah mean when he said this and that? But what does the book of the prophet Isaiah mean ultimately? I look through the lens of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen from the dead. And now, look through that lens, disciplined by the whole theological tradition that surrounds Jesus Christ. And now I'm going to read Isaiah with particular perceptiveness.
Well, let's take a more particular example. Let's say the texts of the Bible that are apparently more violent, even where God advocates violence as a means to an end. How would we use that interpretive model that you've proposed to reason our way through those texts?
Good. I'm glad you raised it, because it's something that really bothers people, I find, in my work in apologetics and evangelization. It really bothers people, the violence of the Bible. I'll say just a couple quick things about it. First, let's do the historical thing. Go back now to the time when the book of Joshua is written. Joshua is famous for this kind of blitzkrieging genocide that's going on as the Israelites come into the promised land. They're putting people to death. And, so it's very offensive to our sensibilities today. Well, go back to that time. If you're a Jew of that time, or really anyone from that culture, what is the best way you have of telling people that your God is powerful? The way to do that is to use this military language, that he's the Lord of armies. So we talk about he's Yahweh Sabaoth. That means he's Yahweh, the Lord of the armies, the Lord of hosts. It was a way of speaking about God's power and God's sovereignty. Now, we find that language offensive today. They didn't in ancient times. They wouldn't have found that offensive particularly. But I think the theological point remains that God is sovereign, God is powerful. But the symbol system used at the time that was not offensive has become offensive to us. But maybe we could move away from the particularities of that and get to the symbolic meaning. Second way to look at it, with Jesus' interpretive lens in mind. Origen of Alexandria lived in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Very early figure. And Origen knew many rabbis. He was conversant with Hebrew. He knew the rabbis. He was very close to the way Jews read the Bible. And he gives us this densely textured, symbolic reading of the Bible. He doesn't eschew the historical level, but he goes to much deeper symbolic places. Well, Origen said, read Joshua in light of Yehoshua. So Joshua, it's the same name as Jesus. Jesus is just the Latin version of Yehoshua, right? So he said, to understand that book, we need to look at the real Joshua, who is Jesus risen from the dead. Once you do that, now you see that whole story, Origen said, as an allegory of the spiritual struggle. Israel standing for all the powers in you that are aligned to God, and now the Amalekites and the Amorites and the Hittites and all the people that they conquer stand for all those things in you that are opposed to God. What is God saying? Conquer them. In fact, wipe them out. In fact, put the ban on them. That means kill every man, woman, child, and animal, right? And we say, well, how offensive? Because we read it simply as a political claim. But read it allegorically. Put the ban on whatever in you is of hatred and violence and division and sin, right? Don't play around with sin. Think of King Saul. God gives the command to put the ban on the Amalekites. I want you to kill all of them. And of course, Saul doesn't. He keeps some for himself, including the king. And of course, the prophet Samuel is so mad at him, and that's why he's punished. And we say, well, how crazy. Who's this bloodthirsty God that wants to just wipe out everybody? Here's poor Saul trying to be a nice fella, and God is being mean to him. No, but read it with Origen's interpretation in mind. Saul represents something we all do. Oh, yeah, I'm going to eliminate that from my life, this evil, whatever it is. My hatred, my violence, my self-absorption, my lust, whatever it is. Oh, yeah, I'm going to deal with that. But I'll keep a little bit for myself. I'll play with evil a little bit. I'll keep a little bit behind. Oh, God won't mind that, will he? If I just keep a little bit of that. Yes, he does, because it's like saying, I got 95% of the cancer. Well, that's not going to solve the problem. You don't want to just leave the 5% behind. It'll sicken you again in short order. And so that's how Origen reads that language of conquest and putting the ban on and killing and so on as a spiritual allegory. But that's a good example of how to read it through the lens of Jesus.